So I can remember, and I have this written down in my journals because I journal, writing down, I want to be at the center of it, and that's where it is. Little did I know, see also the trending story, see also traveling the world, standing on stage in Delhi to be like, we're here to make friends, we're here to help.
Hi, Matt Meyer, County Executive, host of PodCounty, here with my partner in excellence, producer of PodCounty, Kyle Grantham. Today we're going to be talking to Benjamin Wagner. One thing I love about Delaware, they call it a state of neighbors, but so many of our neighbors are extraordinary and doing amazing things and have amazing backgrounds. I mean, Bob Marley, Aubrey Plaza, Joe Biden, the list goes on and on. Today we're talking to the extraordinary Benjamin Wagner, who recently moved to Delaware. He's sort of an adopted Delawarean. He loves it here, and he has very high-level experiences at MTV, at Facebook. He has a perspective on the world of media and the world of business that few others have. So we're excited. Listen up to hear about Benjamin's time at Facebook, the influence of social media on society, and the impact of technology as we look forward to our shared future. We're here today with Delawarean, Renaissance man, Benjamin Wagner. Talk about a career, looking out for a community, and developing yourself and your family across the country and now in Delaware.
Yeah.
Let's start talking about trending.
Oh, God, you went right into this.
Let's go right into it. Yeah.
Well, that's a nice setup.
So you're working at Facebook?
Yeah. I started at Facebook in 2014. I was hired by the news partnerships team. I'm a journalist. The center of my core competency is journalism. Been writing for newspapers since I was 15. The Suburban and Wayne Times in Wayne, Pennsylvania. And I was hired for to run a product called Paper, which is a standalone Facebook app that enabled people to basically browse the day's news. And when I started, the day I started, they deprecated Paper. In other words, they killed the product. Like at Menlo Park, my very first day. Okay, we're not going to do this anymore, the thing I'm hired to do. But I got focused on trending and then building this thing called Facebook Media Central. And trending was about 40 human curators who worked with the algorithm to basically, it's called humans in the loop. So you needed humans to both identify actual trending stories and also to say, no, that one's not trending, and then eventually to write headlines and associate imagery. So we'd done this quietly for, a year plus, and it was part of a product portfolio I helped to manage. And at one point, I actually write about this in a book I'm working on. I'm in Mark's All Hands. So every quarter, Mark and Cheryl get the whole company
Mark
together.
Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg.
Yeah, and I talk about them like we're pals. To be clear, we are not. I was many, many steps down the chain.
Right.
But we're in an All Hands, and Mark's talking about live launch. It's 2016. And I see a story on my phone, and all my peers around me at this conference table start looking at their phone, and I start, breaking out in a bit of a sweat. And Gizmodo has published a story that suggests that the human curators, which Facebook had chosen to keep secret, they didn't want anyone to know that there were humans working on it. It had eventually been published. As you know, Matt, if you really want a story to not be well known, you do it either on like Christmas Eve or Labor Day weekend.
Yep.
This particular story was Labor Day weekend. Oh, we do have humans working on it. So no one knew there were humans. And certain folks on the political spectrum chose to suggest that these young curators were making decisions based on politics, not based on journalism. There were 33 pages of documentation guidelines that we had produced to suggest otherwise. In other words, this team used a very rigorous set of rules to determine what they were doing.
So you don't think politics was involved in that?
I assure you it wasn't. That was on, let's say for the sake of argument, on a Tuesday and on a Wednesday. I'm walking through this sort of media hub that I had built. It had 33 monitors overhead with visualizations of the day's news, cable news, and I see, I've been sick to my stomach for 24 hours at this point because this is the kind of story where you just think, my career's over. I mean, I'm telling you the short version. I thought for sure when the story broke that I was out of there, that was the end. Luckily, Facebook was pretty comfortable with that kind of discomfort at that point. The next day, Senator Thune said, I demand an investigation, and I saw that on the lower third on all of the cable news channels, and I just thought, oh my goodness. I remember saying to the lawyer, am I going to need to buy a suit and go testify? And she's like, don't be naive, kid.
Your humans at Facebook didn't stop that from trending, did they?
No, they did not. That's a great
Okay.
question. No, in fact, we had to be sure that a story like that, and this was one of the kinds of things that was in those guidelines, is you have to be in a position, and this is true in all news organizations, to tell the hard news about yourselves too, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of stuff that went into that documentation. And I will say, by the way, I've worked in, I don't know, half a dozen or more newsrooms. Nobody has 33 pages of guidelines around policy and procedure, and that was against one product, right? So the investigation, both internal and otherwise, suggested there was no malfeasance. It was some, my sense of it is it was some disgruntled young people who were contractors and not staffers, and so they felt pretty badly about the dynamic of their work engagement, and it was hard and unfun work. And what's more, as you know about artificial intelligence and machine learning, the objective was to teach the algorithm in real time. So every time a curator gave it a signal, machine learning was then synthesizing those signals. Yeah. So the end game is that there are no humans doing the curation. And if you're a curator, that's not a good feeling. Final note on that, part of what I was doing at the time was to try and develop an internal ecosystem where the skills of a journalist were of value across multiple products. In other words, I knew that this particular product had an end date in terms of humans in the loop. And so I was trying to create an ecosystem where these young journalists, 30-something journalists, had places to go where that expertise could render in other ways. That did not come to pass because eventually that product was deprecated, and my role switched within 48 hours into what was called global programs. So I had to travel the world and begin to engage journalists and journalism executives one-to-one in what Facebook was doing, and that became the Facebook Journalism Project. And the next 4 years of my life, traveling from Seattle to Singapore, from New Delhi to Hyderabad to Manila, Jakarta, yada, yada, yada.
So, Benjamin, it sounds like you're really on the front lines from when Facebook went from a beloved service connecting, me to everyone I knew in high school and all these long-lost friends to when it became something that was, sort of an embarrassment.
Which was and it's worth noting, I had a similar experience, not apples to apples, but I was at MTV News for 18 years, and when I joined MTV News in 1995, I'd grown up watching Kurt Loder and John Norris at 10 to the hour every hour. I'd grown up reading Rolling Stone. These were the twin
icons.
sources, of my sort of pop culture world. I'm at the time, as a kid, an aspiring musician. By the time I'm in New York City, I'm a performing singer-songwriter, musician. So when I started, it was, at its sort of nadir. By the time I left, it was kind of in Jersey Shoreville, and in the ridiculousness repeat mode, where that was a show where, you basically saw humans. It was like humans having skateboard accidents, over and over and over.
Repeat?
Yeah, it was called Ridiculousness, and they would just repeat it all day. They still do this. If you watch MTV, Ridiculousness is it's like America's Funniest Home Videos, but worse because it's like injury oriented, you know what I mean? Which
it's
to me,
America's Most Dangerous.
I will fold in another of my passions, as you know, and also to pivot to the positive, which is, Fred Rogers is not just a hero, but a mentor of mine. I made a film about Fred called Mr. Rogers and Me, which we premiered on PBS in 2012. It's still available on Amazon Prime and Apple. And Fred got into television, this is in the movie, Fred says this, because he saw people putting pies in each other's face, right, in early television. And he hated that idea that media was being used to degrade.
So, bring out the worst in us.
Yeah, and so by the time, listen, I had a great time at MTV News. I think I told you I recently launched a podcast called You Hear It First, where I've been interviewing John Norris and Sujin Pak and all of my great colleagues there. And I had a great time and I learned a ton. But at a certain point, it felt like it was tipping, and this is how I met Fred in the context of our first conversation. I said, I'm really uncomfortable with some of the content at the company I work at, which goes to the Facebook point, And he said to me, I feel so strongly that deep and simple is far more essential than shallow and complex, and that has become a bit of a North Star for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't that I didn't think about the world that way. It's that he gave me specific language and kind of the challenge. The next summer I said to him, I've been thinking about that all year long. This is back in 2001. I've been thinking about your deep and simple thing all year long. And he said to me, spread the message, Benjamin. And I was like, me? I'm like a 31-year-old, not a media executive. I'm a kid. And it's been 20 years, right? Yeah. And I'm still in my own way trying to spread the message. My company, Essential Industries, is named in reference to Fred. Fred loved the Little Prince, the book by Saint-Exupéry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's right. Nice French.
Yeah.
And he had the quote on his office wall his entire career that said, and you probably know the quote, "What's essential is invisible to the eye." And that's the kind of space I try and transact, if you will. That's what I love. That's what I like about you. I like the connections and the synapses and the excitement and the enthusiasm and the magic and the
That's
stuff.
what makes us human.
Right,
Animals,
that's right.
to my knowledge, can't do that.
That's right.
Other
That's
animals.
right.
So you had extensive experience, MTV News, Facebook. You're now an incredible entrepreneur with your hands in all different places, including playing some music. How did it start? Where were you born? Where were you raised? What was the pathway that eventually landed in Wilmington, Delaware?
Sure. Oh, I'll do it as fast as I can. My family's from Iowa, Waterloo, Iowa, which is kind of north central Iowa. My dad's side of the family worked at John Deere, kind of working class, like legit on the floor at John Deere. His father was D-Day +2. My mom's family had a dairy business and then had gotten into fine clothing. He was a clothier, my grandfather. And so my mom had experience as a kid coming from Iowa to New York City, which for Iowa in 1952 or 55 is pretty unusual, right? My dad, on the other hand, I don't think ever got out of Waterloo, They met in high school, they married after college, and I was born on September 4th, 1971. My father got in the car and drove to Washington, D.C. on September 5th, 1971, and my family followed 3 weeks later. So that began this sort of life of travel. And quickly we did.
So you were born in Iowa. You were an Iowa resident for 3 weeks.
I was an Iowa resident for 3 weeks. That's right.
Do you get in-state tuition?
No, that's a good question. It's funny you say that too, because people are like, "What?" As a New Yorker, I would always say I'm from Iowa because it's a great contrast, and it's like when you're myth making or you're telling bio, that makes a lot of sense. And the fact is, Matt, we traveled from Iowa to Maryland, from Maryland to Indiana, from Indiana to Chicago, Illinois, from Chicago, Illinois to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with lots of little moves in between. And the only place I went to consistently was back to Waterloo. So I do think of myself spiritually or existentially, karmically, as a kid from Waterloo, Iowa.
Culturally Iowan.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't know where I'm from.
I was born in Michigan. And I moved here when I was about a year old.
Yeah. So there's a part of you that's, I think, grounded in that.
Oh,
in that
definitely.
Place,
when I was
right?
a kid, I was all about Michigan.
Yeah, and again, the entire family is still there, still. So I went to high school up in Chester County at Conestoga Public School. I went to Syracuse University and didn't know what to do. I had a dual major in creative writing, and I was at the Newhouse School of degree in newspaper, which is funny because the Newhouse School is really known for broadcasting. But I did newspaper. I fancied myself a writer. I still am a writer at heart. And after college, moved in with my big brother in Saratoga Springs, and shortly thereafter he said, "Hey, my company's moving to New York. Do you want to come?" And I was like, sure. It was not well considered. It wasn't strategic. It was just like, well, Chris is going and I don't know what else to do, so I'll go along. I ended up staying there for almost a decade longer than he did. I definitely landed and sort of accelerated very quickly there. It was a great, great run. As I mentioned quickly, I was at Rolling Stone.
So you mentioned you got a job at Rolling Stone at a restaurant in the Village?
Yeah. Well, so I land in Hell's Kitchen in 1995. And I don't really know where to start because I'm still a kid, and I got a couple clips from some newspapers I've been writing at. And my mother's like, "Well, get a legal pad and write down the name of everybody you know and ask for information."
Good advice, Mom.
It was literally networking 101 when I was like, "Oh, I hate this," but it was super effective.
Yeah.
Called Syracuse, said, "Who do we know at Rolling Stone?" And I want to acknowledge some privilege here because not everybody gets this kind of access. And the Alumni Center at Syracuse said, "Oh, we got some guy who works at Rolling Stone." And the guy begrudgingly says, "Meet me at the White Horse Tavern." It is, Matt, you'll remember this. It was a few days after the Murrow building. Was it Murrow or Murray building? It was a few days after the Oklahoma City bombing.
Oh, yeah, Murrow, yeah.
And all of his buddies or journos who were meeting him there, BBC. I remember a guy from the BBC. I'm a kid, and this dude's from the BBC, and I'm like, and they're like leather jacket, like rock star journos. And his name was Pete Wilkinson, well known, still writes for them, still on the masthead. Pete said, "Well, you don't have enough clips for a job, kid, but I'll get you an internship." And at this point, I'm like 24, and I'm like, internship? But I zipped my lip and I took the internship. And, within 3 weeks, they were paying me to write copy. And within 6 weeks, I was writing for Rolling Stone Online because no one knew what online meant. And I had a Mac and a modem, and that was all it took.
What does Sheryl Sandberg say? Like, it doesn't matter where on the ladder you get, but get on the ladder.
Yeah, man, that's great. That's right. That's right. I mean, give my mom credit, great entrepreneur. She was like, get in the door and then figure it out. And it took almost no time.
Which, again, actually, that is privilege, right? Not everyone can do that.
Not everyone can get in the door.
At 24, 25 need to fend for their family and can't just go take an internship.
Yep.
But hats off to you. That's amazing. So so you climbed up at Rolling Stone. How long were you at Rolling Stone?
I was only
for?
at Rolling Stone for like a year. And I wrote like, you'll love this, I wrote like Goo Goo Doll concert reviews, and I interviewed like Better Than Ezra and Ani DeFranco and stuff like that. Ben Folds 5, if you remember them.
Sure. Why'd you leave?
Well, I got a full-time job at Lifetime, which was kind of a head-scratcher, right? Like, wait, you went where? And again, credit to Mom. Mom said, well, they're going to teach you this thing called HTML and how to do the internet. You probably should learn how to do that because it seems like it's a thing. And I was like, but it's women's TV, and I don't know anything about those shows. And she's like, go. And I did it for a year. And in 1996,
you listen to your mom a lot more than I listen to mine.
Well, I did it in that era, and it was. I like to give her credit where it's due. Great entrepreneurial advice. In 1996, I went to Chicago for the Democratic National Convention to cover it for Lifetime, and I was there before all the other Lifetime peeps. And I walked in, and I saw these cool kids with tattoos and stickers on their laptops. And I was like, oh, it's the MTV Choose or Lose crew. Yeah. And I walk up to this guy, and I say, hey, where am I supposed to plug in, my ISDN line or whatever? Yeah. And I put out my hand, and I guess I'm cordial enough because he ended up hiring me to launch MTV News' daily news operation 6 weeks later.
Wow.
His name's Michael Alex, still friends. Just interviewed him for the You Heard First podcast. One of the original Week in Rock producers,
Wow.
His first assignment was the Ramones. So,
Hats off to you, though. I mean, you're taking to heart that sort of everyone you meet is a job interview. You're meeting people and saying, hey, this is a potential opportunity.
I still do. And not in terms of a job interview, but like I get so excited. I mean, I hope this is the experience you and I had where I'm like, well, I don't know. This seems like a really interesting, thoughtful, engaged, committed person. And I want to be around that kind of person. And that's the bottom line. So I just try and be as present as I can. I mean, and this is super Fred. It's very Fred Rogers just to be like, well, this is who I'm with right now. Yeah. I'm going to be as connected and present with them as I can be and not be outcome oriented. Yes, when I was 24, I needed to get a job because I had to make my half of rent. But at this point in my life, I mean, I just had a coffee with J.C. Barker from Delaware Symphony Orchestra.
Amazing guy.
Just because I happened to meet him at the Art Summit and I thought he was interesting and I have no objective other than like, interesting guy. Yeah. Love to have coffee.
How many Alabamans?
No, right. We had a great time.
Symphony end up in Delaware.
I'm going to the Delaware Symphony Orchestra on next Friday.
Yeah. So MTV. So you're at Lifetime, and then from there you meet the Choose or Lose guys in Chicago.
Yeah.
And you end up in MTV.
So I launched MTV News' daily news operation. We sketched the website on a napkin at probably Rudy's.
Right.
I'm not joking. Probably it might have been. Manhattan. That's right. Launched it a couple months later with a pal of mine named Rob Mancini, still a friend.
So you launched the MTV website?
The MTV News' daily news website and multiple iterations up until 2014. In fact, when I left in 2014, I had just relaunched. I won't bore you with the details, but the product hadn't moved very much in years. And I just, was one of the things I agitated for because, products need to change all the time, especially digital products. So we launched the daily news operation into the public in 1997. Yeah, I mean, so I was there for. I mean, it's hard to remember it all, and that's one of the reasons why doing this You Heard First podcast has been so much fun. But I mean, I was there for boy bands. I was there for Gaga. I was there for Kanye. We did a ton of hip hop stuff. Did a live show with Sway Calloway called Rap Fix Live. We had a big, hotly debated list called Hottest MCs, where you would rank the hottest rappers, and it was a big deal. Like these guys would name check the list in their songs. Jay-Z, Wayne, all of them. So it's really hard to remember. I mean, I was there when Kanye took the Moon Man from Taylor. I have interviewed Bono a few times. I interviewed Neil Young, and actually Jonathan Demme. They did a movie together, which is, if you're a filmmaker, you love Jonathan Demme. It's hard to remember, but I started, in essence, as a producer, and I would sometimes write and interview. But I pretty quickly realized that there was an opportunity to provide leadership. I was a student council kid. I liked being that guy. And I also often was the person agitating for change because it felt like, I mean, this is still my experience in a lot of cases in the world where you just want to advocate for progress, right?
Right.
I think this is probably right up your alley.
That's
you
right.
know?
So I don't think many people who advocate for progress would see a move from MTV to Facebook, at least how Facebook is seen in this day and age.
Yeah. There's a couple of reasons I made the transition. I mean, I transitioned from MTV News to Facebook in 2014. It's worth noting, there was a point in my, and again, as I've literally been writing this I get up at 5 and write for an hour or two every morning, and I've been writing this part really recently in the last few days. There was a time at MTV News when it was very clear that the man who was running it, and who was running it when I started, not my boss, but at the time it was my boss's boss, and eventually he became my boss. His name's Dave Cyrilnik. If you look at him on IMDb, he is the guy behind TRL, guy behind the Video Music Awards, long list of tremendous achievement in broadcasting, specifically news, was a CNN guy who loved hip-hop and basically took MTV News from sort of a scrappy little group of producers into a real live news business. But it was clear to me that the winds were changing and that Dave was on the outs. And so when I sort of figured that out, I just started initiating a sort of exit strategy. It was 18 years too, like 18 years at a place like that, at a place that is youth culture oriented. So it was apparent to me that it was time to go. So I did 3 things, and I like to share these with people because there's a explicitness and a sort of tactic oriented approach to this that I find useful. And also I think it's important when you feel something changing that you do get tactic oriented. This is often the kind of executive coaching I give. 1, hired a resume coach. 2, hired an executive coach, somebody to help keep me accountable. I acknowledge that these are not things everybody can do, but people can find people to help keep them accountable, which was my objective. And 3, I applied to a fellowship at Columbia, a year-long fellowship called the Sulzberger Fellowship, which was founded and funded by the Sulzberger family, who owns the New York Times. And it was basically McKinsey Consulting meets media transformation. Did a year there. My objective was to broaden my perception in the industry as not just the pop culture guy, but as the news guy, because in my heart, I was always a news guy. So in the middle of that fellowship, one of my professors there, if you will, said to me, hey, one of our former fellows at Facebook is looking for a managing editor. Would you be interested? And I was like, oh, are you kidding? Of course. You got to remember in 2014,
Facebook was the
barely
thing.
IPO'd. Everybody's using it. And most importantly, 60-some% of American consumers are getting their news there. So I can remember, and I have this written down in my journals because I journal, writing down, I want to be at the center of it, and that's where it is. Little did I know, see also the trending story, see also traveling the world, standing on stage in Delhi to be like, we're here to make friends, we're here to help, And also Cambridge Analytica happened. I don't even know if I guess I was on my way out by the time Cambridge Analytica happened. So to me, 2016 and the election is where it started smelling weird. People started saying weird things, and people started learning about how the algorithm really works, and some of the decisions about what to uprank and downrank had some negative implications. Friends and families ended up kind of like tightening the bubble around people as opposed to creating more exposure to difference and so forth. So in 2014, it was the center of where news was, and that was always and remains.
For kids listening, it was like TikTok.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Before it ripped off stories, from Snapchat.
Right.
And before it was really, I think, to some degree, and I use this word in the book, in the sort of derivative product business. Even Facebook Live was basically borrowed from Twitter Telescope, which is the ability to go live on your phone. So when I started there, it really was exciting. People were excited to come in. LeBron James came and did, sat in this sort of newsroom environment that I created and did our sort of video games.
Yeah, had the whole world on it. And
it really was.
A lot of the other Instagram probably wasn't where it is today.
It wasn't.
But Facebook was the thing.
It wasn't, but it was also clear to me because right before I started, Facebook had acquired Instagram, Oculus, and WhatsApp. And to me, that showed something really interesting, which is the ability to understand that there was a sort of a life cycle to these products.
Yeah, you couldn't even though you're winning, you can't just keep doing the same thing.
There was this diversification of the portfolio that said to me, oh, this is a company that's probably going to stick around for a second. And Instagram really remains. I mean, I continue to use Instagram as my primary marketing channel for music. Are you? I couldn't do it. And then when Adam Mosseri, who I know a teeny bit, who runs product for Instagram, or runs Instagram now, ran product for Facebook at the time, when Mosseri was like, yeah, we don't really want the news industry on here. I was like, what, dude? I get it. He's literally explicitly saying we do not want to step back into that again.
Right.
It was painful.
You ruined one platform.
All of the people I used to work with at Facebook and in the Facebook Journalism Project, all of them are gone. All of it's over, So it was a time, and I got to say, it was really, really, really hard. But it was also a tremendous learning experience, and I would never, Matt. I did not dream as a kid from Iowa to see Kuala Lumpur, or Hong Kong, or Sydney, or even to just travel the United States to the degree that I did. But I mean, I got to see Europe and Asia. I mean, Waterloo, Iowa. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You don't do Jakarta. You don't do Sydney, so.
Didn't run into many Waterloo-born
never.
there.
A few Iowans, but very, very, very rarely Waterloo.
So one word we haven't said is Delaware.
Yeah.
So you're a New Yorker of sorts, an Iowan New Yorker.
Yeah.
High school in Chester County, have an incredible professional career that's enabling you to meet some phenomenal people, some really thought leaders, and some cultural leaders across the world. Why Delaware? When Delaware?
Well, there's a very simple and great answer to that. In 2005, at one of my shows, I continued performing. I played in bands in college.
What do you play?
In high school, I'm a singer-songwriter, so I play acoustic guitar and sing. I like to think of myself as a singer first of 10 albums. They're all on Spotify, Benjamin Wagner, and they're all on iTunes and stuff. At a show in 2005, a woman came up to me after my set and said, "Great set. Can I buy you a beer?" And I thought, well, boy, that's a great 1-2 punch. And she was beautiful and had a twinkle to her eye. And 2 years later, I asked her to marry me. And we have 2 beautiful daughters. And that woman, Abigail Keller, now Abigail Wagner, is born in Wilmington and went to Tower Hill. And her family lives in Greenville. So we always came back. In fact, I remember the first time getting off at the Joseph Biden train station, Amtrak station. I remember the first time I came, and we went to dinner with her parents. And particularly once we had kids, and as New York City got more and more frenetic, and the pace of our experience there got more and more challenging. My wife worked at Tiffany for 15 years, and so she was traveling domestically quite a bit. I was traveling globally quite a bit. We would kind of high five in the middle, and we would come here on weekends with our girls. And at a certain point, we kind of just looked at each other and said, we should probably just stay here. One Sunday night, as I would say, white knuckling it back to New York, because you felt like you had to brace yourself to deal with the Turnpike, and moreover to deal with Lincoln Tunnel. We just were like, we don't have to do this anymore. So we started to trying to sort of form a plan, and it took us a couple of years. I think that sort of epiphany was around 2017. And we moved in June of 2019, so pre-COVID. It was not a COVID emergency.
And you're still at Facebook at this point?
I stayed at Facebook.
Your job's in New York?
My job was in New York. I would wake up, at 5 and go to the train station and go for a, Monday, Tuesday, and come back on a Wednesday or what have you. It would change, or I would fly out of Philadelphia to London, or whatever.
She was at Tiffany in New York as well.
Abigail, when we moved here, stopped working and launched her own business. Abby, as wouldn't surprise you, is a woman who worked in marketing at Tiffany, has a tremendous eye and has great taste. So she has a company called Burton and Ashby. She does interior design that is really, as I often say, and we haven't really touched on mental health or wellness, but Abigail constructs worlds externally that create calm and peace and tranquility and a sense of wellness. And a lot of the work I've been doing in the last few years is about the interior, which is really interesting to me. So really, the short answer to your question is I fell in love with a lady from Wilmington. And I knew Wilmington because we would drive through here on our way to Rehoboth because I worked at Funland in the summer, So I knew enough. But once we visited here a bit, and I would drive the girls when they were babies around the back roads, like by Grenoble.
Beautiful.
And I would think, I guess it's chateau country, and I would just think, this is just gorgeous. And it's a secret, to me, it was a secret little pocket. And the more I get to know it, the more I want to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
So it was really a concerted effort and continues to be I can't tell you, man, we got a puppy a year ago, and of course Dad takes her out most of the time. I live in the Highlands neighborhood. Most nights we bump into a fox or two, you know what I mean? Yeah. This morning I heard, I use an app on my phone to identify birds because I hear so many and see so many beautiful birds. there's only one kind of bird in Manhattan. It's a pigeon. So like the degree of beauty and wonder and natural beauty and wonder that I experience in this area is so overwhelming. I'm so grateful for it and so glad to be here. It's been so great for my nervous system, which unsurprisingly was pretty wrecked by the time COVID hit and everyone had to stay home.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be some rough industries and during COVID in New York.
And then you add working in the news business,
Yeah.
living in New York City, traveling the world, and by the time
And high-fiving your wife once a week.
that's
or
right, and
whatever.
not seeing the people you love enough, and then add a global pandemic, and suddenly I couldn't move, and I was under a lot of duress, and so this new movie I'm just about to premiere. Hopefully, we just did a festival premiere, and working on a 2024 release plan. Is called Friends and Neighbors. It started as a podcast I did. One of my first guests was Sarah McBride, who said something that really catalyzed this movie. She said to me, when we're vulnerable ourselves, we give others permission to do the same. It was just in the context of a conversation we had. And I went, you know who would have said that sentence like that? Fred Rogers. And you know what Fred would say to me? He'd say, spread that message now.
Yeah.
And so that's the new movie. And I tell the story I just shared with you with an emphasis on the hard parts, because we rarely talk about the hard parts. Like, I'm sure your job is very frenetic and sometimes difficult to feel grounded in the moment, because there's a part of you that's like thinking about like the next thing, right? And I get that. And it's hard if you're thinking about the next thing or you're preoccupied with the past,
yeah,
right?
you got to be present.
Right, and it's very challenging, and there's so many dynamics in American culture that make that difficult, and so many. I mean, there's a solid argument that says capitalism itself is predicated on not making the present valuable, and in fact, in a lot of ways, helping us medicate that discomfort with the present.
Yeah.
Because the present, if you're truly still, you're going to feel the feelings, and sometimes feelings stink. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes they're great if you hear a beautiful bird, but if you're like, oh, that trending experience where I thought I was going to throw up for 3 weeks straight, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That wasn't great. Or that time I was pretty sure my boss was going to get fired, and sure enough, he did. And then the president of the company was like, so Benjamin, you don't want to remember those feelings, or about that time
or my mother died,
Right.
and I'm getting a day older
That's
and towards that fate
That's right.
myself.
That's
and how do you cope with that?
That's right. And I think a lot of our inclination is to not. And so, this new movie, Friends and Neighbors, which Sarah's in, which Alana Berry, who is leading trauma-informed care work in Delaware. Some of my actual friends from high school, my friend Lauren Scott, was a professional guidance counselor for the grammar school in the same district we attended. So she taught me a ton about social emotional regulation. Basically, if you understand the nervous system and you understand what we all think of as fight or flight, it take you a long way to actually understand what our experience is in the world. So that's kind of I find that work now informs everything I do, from executive coaching to strategic consulting, because we're all under duress a lot of the time. And as I often say, like, a well person is a well CEO. And they're not really mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
We tend to think of them as separate. I like to think of the hallmark of my work increasingly as holistic. Me, the artist, me, the executive, me, the strategic thinker and leader, and me, the human being, right? Which is part of the reason why I was happy to accept your invitation, and part of the reason why I responded to you when we met. So I was like, Matt Meyer, the human being.
Yeah.
Nice to meet a human being.
Yeah. It's an incredible Delaware story, Benjamin.
Well, I got to emphasize how happy I am to be here. I got no plans to do anything else other than be a Delawarean for as long as, heck, I hate to think about any end, but I got no end in mind other than I'd like a little more time at the beach. But, I'm happy. I'm so happy to be here. And my wife often says that she wouldn't have guessed it, but life's funny that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it is a really special pocket of America. I'm so happy to be here.
What advice would you give 18-year-old kid coming out of high school who's like, wow, Benjamin's out of he's playing music. He's met some of the coolest people in the last generation of pop culture, had incredible chances to travel, been in senior roles in cutting-edge companies.
I have lots, but the first thing is actually, if you'll beg my forgiveness, a Facebookism. Facebook did a great job at promoting internal culture, company culture with their posters. It's called the Analog Research Team. One of the posters, of course.
Like physical, just posters.
Actual physical posters. There was a
Not
team
like
at Facebook.
social media pages.
Nope,
just
they would actually make art. And the one we all think of is the one that said move fast and break things, which of course was problematic. By the time I started
Move
there,
fast is good.
that's right.
Yeah,
By the time
break
I
things.
started there, it said move fast and build things. But the one that I like, and the one to your question that I would encourage people to think about, and the one that I repeat often with teams when I'm leading in a strategic consulting capacity, is start anywhere. The key is to move and to start. And so, like in my experience, people get really caught up in like the idea of getting something perfectly right before you go out there. Oh, I need my pitch deck to be perfect. I need this cover letter to be perfect. And I think you just got to get moving and know. And a lot of times I talk about like you want to prototype something, right? You want to get your idea out into the marketplace, and then the marketplace is going to give you feedback, and then you're going to test and iterate and look at the data and change the product. And I like to think about my work that way. The first episode of my podcast, not great.
Right.
Ideally, the 100th episode is better. The first movie I made, pretty good. The next movie, the one we just did, really pretty great, right? So like I do think there's something to starting anywhere, to understanding that we are all an iterative sort of experiment, that, you know, that growth mindset. Quick story to support that. At MTV News, I got Battlefield promoted the day after Bear Stearns collapse and all that. Dave Cerolnik said to me, the guy who's running MTV News now will no longer be running MTV News. Would you like to run MTV News? And I was like, yes, I would. And he said to me, do you have any big ideas? And I said, well, let me go back to the lab and come back. And a couple of days later, I came back and said, there's no single solution for this. This is going to be increments. And I think if we do these 20 things and we stay focused on them, we're going to drive growth. And we drove huge revenue growth, and we drove huge digital growth, all with half the budget and half the staff, because that was what was imperative at that time. So my point is, like, I think it's that growth mindset of like incremental progress, and not having this expectation that you're going to end up at MTV News the day you knock on the door, you know, in New York City. It's going to take a second, you know.
And also doors open in unexpected ways.
100%. And to our previous discussion, the more times you stick out your hand with a smile on your face and say, pleasure to meet you, which is what I did with Michael Alex at the DNC in Chicago, and 100 other times, or a million other times since, the way we did, you know, you can't know. And instead of thinking of those relationships as transactional, just think about them as human beings.
As relationships.
Just people you get to meet. And how cool is
Yeah.
that? That's kind of why we're here. If you know, we're social creatures.
Yeah,
so.
it's interesting to me as I've gone through my career that there are things you want to do when you're in junior high or high school. It's hard to think of an example now, but you want to do, and then you get closer to doing it, and you find that relationship, that chemistry, it's not really for me. The way it was advertised on TV or on social media isn't really the reality, or isn't really my understanding of it, or it's changed. So I'm going to go something else. So you end up at, what was it, Lifetime?
Yep.
Right? Where you in Lifetime, that's like that's not
and
my
that's why
thing.
I always share that part of the story, right? Because the steps are usually not direct.
Yeah.
And often, to your point, the job is not as advertised, and there's a lot of jobs around the job. So to me, it was either rock star or like kind of, you know, Kurt Loder, anchor, a bunch of jobs around that can still connect you to that passion. And the other thing I often tell young people is there's a lot of time to your day. So like people would be like, how'd you make a movie while you're running MTV News? And I was like, well, I would write emails on the subway, and I would like script on the subway. And when I went home, I didn't watch TV. I worked, you know, and I worked on something that I loved. I still do it. I mean, I work on my podcast. I'm writing a book. You know, we're working now on getting distribution and doing marketing around this movie.
Right.
I made the movie while building this other business.
Well, in fairness, you didn't watch TV at night because you were watching TV all day. Anyway, we're here. Benjamin Wagner, thanks so much for coming in for PodCounty.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you adding so much to Delaware.
I'm happy
and
to be
investing. You could do what you do and do it outside Delaware while being in Delaware. You're in Delaware and you're present in Delaware, and it adds a lot to our community. So
Well,
thank
thanks.
you.
I'm happy to be a part of it.